She's an activist, author, and historian. Her name is Deirdre. No, I'm not talking about myself in the third person. I'm talking about Deirdre Sinnott. She is the author of The Third Mrs. Galloway, a pins and needles story about a Northern woman aiding runaway enslaved people in 1835. We'll talk to Deirdre right after this. But don't forget to hit subscribe or download this podcast if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or Google, or any of the other places where you listen to your podcast. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and hit that notification button so that you can be alerted to other videos that I upload. Let's talk to Deirdre right after this. Hello, Deirdre. How are you?
Hi, Deirdre. Nice to see you.
I know. Another first for this podcast. I'm interviewing someone with my name.
Yes. It makes it extra special.
Exactly. Well, let's dive right into this. The Third Mrs. Galloway is your first novel. And when you read about it and look into it, it had to take a lot of research and all of these things. What inspired you to write this story with all the possibly daunting, exhaustive research that you may have had in front of you?
Well, I had started the research process not knowing that it was going to turn into a novel. I was trying in a way to understand why Utica in particular had been sort of left off of the list of places where there was an underground railroad.
Right, and you mean Utica, New York.
Right. If you know upstate New York, there was a canal that went from Albany to Buffalo through a number of towns. And it is now basically the Mohawk Valley is one of the main areas where this canal ran through. And you would hear about enslaved people and freedom seekers going, up through Virginia to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia,
Right.
New York, through New Jersey, New York, Albany, and Syracuse. And they kind of, when people are talking about it, they skip over Utica. And
Right.
It was a little bit of a rivalry for me with Syracuse because it's like, why not Utica? It's right there, and it seemed like it was skipped over. So I started looking for the word Utica in the index of a number of books on the Underground Railroad until I finally found a reference to the 1835 anti-abolition riot that broke up the founding meeting of the New York Anti-Slavery Society. And I was like, yes, something.
Okay.
So that's where it started.
Yes, and so your book does take place in 1835. With this, you said that was a revolt, or what did you say it was? You just mentioned
there was a founding meeting of the New York Anti-Slavery Society, which was meant to be a statewide institution to bring the news of abolition to all this upstate in particular.
Okay.
But there was an anti-abolition riot that disrupted this meeting to the point where they had to flee and were pelted with stones and mud and everything and reconvened the next day 30 miles away in Peterborough, New York.
Okay.
So it was a surprise to me to find that slavery was so hotly discussed and intensely thought about in upstate New York, which seemed to me to be very far away from where most enslaved people were.
Right. Exactly. And I think as we have gone on and done more research and opened our eyes, we can find that all of let's just say the 13 original colonies, let's just say, were all really involved in the issue of slavery, not only as a social justice type of issue, but it was an economic issue as well. So all of them were touched by that, because somehow, some way, each state was making money from enslaved people. No matter how you look at it.
Absolutely. And even Oneida County, which is the county that that Utica is in, had enslaved people there working. And certainly all of that work goes unacknowledged, right? Because people don't even know that there had been slavery in New York State, and not just in New York City, but upstate as well.
Right, right. And I will say, for a point of geography, I'm in North Carolina, and you rarely hear, which is definitely the South, but you rarely hear about slavery in North Carolina. And when I have investigated my ancestry, and you look back at old records, it will say farmer. And I can't get a grasp on, I have yet to see enslaved or slave or slave. I can't see that. So I don't know if they were covering their I don't know why I can't see those words, but so far I have not. And I don't know if they were cloaking that in the words of farmer or what, but it's very, very interesting, and it probably needs a deeper dive. I don't know if people are just keeping their mouths closed or pretending it like it didn't happen, but you know it's very rare you hear about slavery and slaves in North Carolina. Now, South Carolina, definitely, because of Charleston, and that's where a lot of the slaves came in, the Charleston port. Virginia, they came in through that Virginia port. North Carolina, it's the graveyard of the Atlantic, so we didn't have a port, as it were, to bring in people. But I don't know. I don't know. Surely the folks filtered from Virginia, down from Virginia, or up from South Carolina to be in North Carolina. So, but yes, very rarely do you hear about slavery in North Carolina. There's no famous stories. You don't really hear anything. So, very, very interesting with that. And that the Utica, you're right. I never heard about Utica, New York, or really even New York so much so as being involved with slavery. And then I think maybe the Quakers got more of the thumbs up of being abolitionist, from what I can remember. They were, that's the Pennsylvania that you were speaking of. I've heard about that, but Utica, no. So this is definitely enlightening people about the whole breadth and scope of enslaved people.
Well, and I think that in general, most people, if you were to say, okay, picture an abolitionist, or picture somebody who was, had a safe house on the Underground Railroad, they would
Right.
picture a white person,
Right.
whereas the African American population was deeply involved in both abolition and the Underground Railroad in
Right.
Oneida County, which means everywhere. So,
Right.
so that is like another unacknowledged part of the story that I think is important to bring out. And it is something that scholars and others are concentrating on more than they had before. There was a certain stamp to it that basically did not include the Black community, and
Right.
that just is another erasure, as if there weren't already enough of those.
Exactly, exactly. I understand what you're saying 100%. Now, let's get a little bit more into the story. The Third Mrs. Galloway. That's a very interesting title. How did you come up with the title?
Oh, well, it was a process, because I had initially wanted to call the book The Society, because I wanted to hit all levels of society in Utica, and I hopefully accomplished that in some measure. But that didn't have that wasn't very catchy for the publisher. So then I was talking about it being named The Comet, because in 1835, in October, Halley's Comet was in the sky.
Oh,
And
oh,
comets at that time, people thought they were like bringing change, and that they were fiery, and that it was, like something to be frightened of. So I
Right.
thought, okay, we're going to call it the Comet. And that wasn't the real name for my mentor either. So I came up with a list of names, and ultimately the third Mrs. Galloway has a little bit of intrigue. So
Yes.
that was how we ended up with the name, and I think it fits. It absolutely fits it.
Yes, and as it reads, as your description reads, it's there's a new Mrs. Galloway, then there's a, I guess, either deceased Mrs. Galloway whose presence is in the home. And is Maggie considered the unofficial third Mrs. Galloway?
Oh, people have to read the book. I'm not going to give
Oh,
away
wow.
that.
Oh, wow. 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 Okay. I thought I had figured it out, but apparently not. Well, exactly. Read the book to find out who the third Mrs. Galloway is. And the new Mrs. Galloway, she's hiding enslaved people. And so she's got a debate telling her husband or keeping a secret. And you're in 1835, and women had to have a certain amount of obedience to their husbands. So this is quite a quandary.
Yeah, for her, she's young too. She's an orphan and was in the
Oh,
school next door when he saw her from his house, and then he went over and talked to the schoolmistress to see if he could uh, broach an engagement. So she's un, she's very young considering, and so when she discovers the freedom seekers in the shed, she does not know what to do at all. All she wants is for them to get out. Like,
right,
we need this problem.
right,
You
right,
should
right.
leave. And also there's a whole lot going on politically, including that the American Colonization Society is sending free Black people, to a colony in Africa, in Liberia. And
Yes.
that is thought of as the only way that the United States is going to be able to end enslavement, because there's very little acceptance of the idea that people born here are citizens, right?
Right,
So
right,
since 1619, there's been African American
right,
people born in the United States but not considered citizens,
right,
and
right, right,
they're considered the other, and they must, by all means, they have to be removed. So the
right.
idea was that there was this colony in Africa on the coast, and we'll send people there. And the Mr. Galway is a member of the American Colonization Society, which most of the educated men who were not necessarily enslavers,
Mhm.
that would be their way of thinking that slavery was going to be able to be ended. In the
Right.
South, there was another agenda, which is they wanted all the free people of color to be sent out because there were bad examples that
Right,
showed enslaved people that they could be free, uh,
right.
and so the different agendas there.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that I wanted to know is this a true story outside of the Utica and the situation and all of that? Is this, are these characters real?
The characters, for the most part, are my invention,
No.
but the whole thing is based on real history, which is interesting. You say that in North Carolina, people don't talk about enslavement. That, of course, was there,
Had to
but
been.
there's this story of these two men who were in Shenandoah County, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, and
I
up
know
there,
what that is.
people also say that there was no enslavement, but there was. And these
There,
two guys, they were told by their mistress, who was dying, she didn't want them sold into a slave coffle and ending up in Natchez or in New Orleans and
yeah,
sold. So
yeah.
she gave them money and told them to flee, and they ended up in Utica, where they stayed in 1836 for a couple of months, and then a slave catcher from Shenandoah County came up and had them arrested.
Oh,
And so there's an element of those two guys, Harry Burt and George, that's in this story in terms of the experience of the freedom seekers.
Right, right. And I like that phrase, the freedom seekers. Is that your invention or?
No, it's the kind of language that people are trying to use because it's
Embrace.
accurate than calling
Yes,
somebody a slave.
yes, yes.
it, it,
Well, here I am, an African American, and we had just been so embedded with the word slaves. And then when younger people, due to the reckoning of the last 2 years, the racial reckoning of the last 2 years, when younger people brought to my attention enslaved people, and I was like, it was hard, believe it or not, to say, well, enslaved and slave. And then it's like once you came to that truth, and this goes to show how colonized we are. This goes to show how colonized a Black person can be in America. And then it took a minute for me. It wasn't an immediate release, and then to embrace, not that I didn't want to, but to embrace the word enslaved persons, because nobody is a slave, just a slave. They were enslaved against their will. And so I was like, oh gosh, yes. And then now you're bringing me freedom seekers. And it's kind of like, why couldn't we have thought of these words or these terms 50 years ago or 30 years ago or even before that? But it's because of the colonization, and the colonization has struck deep in our society.
Absolutely. And it's also there's a lot of racism, both systematic, but there's also internalized racism that
Yes.
I think, well, certainly everybody my age has seen hundreds and hundreds of images and stories
Yes.
about African American people that are negative and very few
Yes.
that are positive. It's better now
Yes.
than it used to be.
Right.
But there, Michelle Alexander, who wrote Warmth of Other Suns and the book Caste, has this little thing in Caste where there's a study where they have people hooked up with monitors and they show them a picture of a Black man from a high school yearbook from years ago, like an old picture.
Yeah.
And, the little fear indicators are going off from a picture, from an old picture from a yearbook. So there's something deeply, deeply embedded that has to be fought like every day that is just there. And we have absorbed it through cultural means, and it's just insidious.
Yes, yes. I will give you a personal example of that study you just mentioned. Take the grocery store. Years ago, let's just say I'm on an aisle in the grocery store with a white woman, and I noticed that they would tend to if you're looking at the shelves and trying to read boxes, cans, or produce, or whatever you're doing, and they would be conscientious of guarding their pocketbook. Like I'm just coming into the grocery store to swoop somebody's pocketbook. And, those were the microaggressions and the embedded racism that people had, and I would used to go by people, and my husband was like, you got to stop doing this. And I would say stuff like, I'm not interested in taking your pocketbook, or stuff like that. And so, but I noticed that now, this is just my own little case study, that people have loosened up that fear, that they're free to look at the shelves without thinking, here comes a Black woman to swoop my pocketbook away. But again, I'm just matching what you're saying from that study, and I did my own little case study for years. That's just how deeply embedded we are, in racism, in our society, and with the colonization. It just was and it seems like it just really just revealed itself like a gush, like a volcano exploding over the last 2 years because of the racial reckoning.
Yeah, I mean, how is it that we're still using 18th and 19th century language to refer to a group of citizens and still be making them different? That this is
Yes,
like that this is other, this is not
right,
us. And
right, right.
well,
We've
I've
been here the whole entire time.
no,
It's like, get used to it. Get used to us, please. Well,
yeah.
speaking of racism, and this could be kind of can be seen by some as a like a reverse racism. Here you are, a white woman, and you have chosen to write a black story. And I know a lot of white writers have received backlash from writing black stories. I think American Dirt, that's a Mexican story. I think a white woman wrote that. There's a Therese Flowers. I think she wrote a book called The Neighborhood. She got a little backlash from that. So, what is your take on that? And how do you handle that?
Well, first of all, I think it's like a really important issue, and that I hope I hope that the discussion of it leads to more African American voices being published,
Right.
because the fact is that publishing in general is run by a lot of white people, and so the stories that they choose are ones that that they identify with in some way.
Mhm.
And so in order to bring more black voices, there has to be more encouragement of black writers. So but for me, I'm trying to, first of all, took it really seriously,
Yes.
right, and wanted to make sure to the best of my ability that I represent people as real in terms of characters as I can, and that I honor the history and the language and the differences between how people talk and how
Mhm.
people think.
Mhm.
So, of course, every white writer will say, "Well, I did a lot of research," and yeah, I did a lot of research. That's for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm. Right. Right.
And I, I don't know how I would have told this story, which I found to be so important from researching just the real history, without using a number of black characters,
Mhm.
so that it's not just like one character who comes and is this representation of other all of everybody. This is like
Right.
characters in this book who are
Right.
African American. Sorry. So the other, and for me, I mean, the other question is, how dare I leave black people out of stories when
Yeah.
since 1619 there's been
Right.
people of African descent
Right.
here,
Right. Right. Right.
and
Right.
by not putting anybody into the like the how many novels is just perfectly lily white.
Right.
Getting in
Right. Right.
trouble from my novelist friends. But what gives me the right to just to not put black people into the stories when that's not my life? That's not the reality of the United States. And
Exactly.
it means that the enormous contributions of the African Americans who were forced or enslaved is never acknowledged, that the foundation of the wealth of society that was built on enslaved labor, that
Right.
nobody is talking or thinking about it. And I don't know, it just seems the story, absolutely, I wanted to tell the story. I couldn't tell the story, didn't want to tell the story without embodying the black characters.
Right. Exactly.
It,
Exactly.
I mean, I tried very hard to get a number of black writers to read the story
Yes. Yes.
in its different stages, to just to say, look, please read this, make
Right.
sure I'm not like committing some error here. And
Right.
I was, gifted with a number of people who were willing to do that, and that
Wonderful.
helped as well. And then also the editor of Kaylee Jones Books and the editor of Akashic Books were also very, although they happen to be white, they also were very, very helpful in terms of character development, so that I felt like, okay, well, I've done the best I humanly can.
Right, right. So that it could be authentic. And so, speaking of that, about your authenticity, and I will go back to your publishing house in just a moment. But I mentioned at the top of the hour that you are an activist, and your activism has, in one way, gone through some documentaries that you've written and produced. On social justice and mass incarceration. Can you tell us the names of those documentaries and a little bit about them?
Sure. There's one, the first one that I did was called 23 Reasons Why 23 Years is Enough. And
Mm-hmm.
it's about Pasquale Shakouri Carpentier, who was a unarmed lookout for a pretty terrible crime happened in New York City in the early 90s, but was used politically as a battering ram against New York's first Black mayor, David Dinkins. And it was
Yes.
just after the Central Park Five,
Okay.
there's
Okay.
trials of Central Park Five, and some of the investigators, the people who questioned the Central Park Five, were also involved in questioning the defendants in this case, and we know that the Central Park were all exonerated.
Right.
So there was a lot wrong with the prosecution and the sentencing of these people. So I met one of them when I went and saw a show in Otisville Correctional Facility,
Okay.
and we started writing back and forth to each other, and it was like a two-person. He was a writer too. He is a
Okay.
writer. So we had a little two-person writing writing group where we
Right.
spared no criticism. He was
Right.
tough on me, and I was
Yeah.
tough on him, and we're still
Right.
friends. So
Right.
family was doing a 23 years is enough, because he had served 23 out of 25 years for being an unarmed lookout, not involved in any violence in this crime. And
Wow.
so I said, oh, I'll make a short film and help you. And of course, it got bigger and bigger. So that's how that one came about.
Oh, wow.
And that's available on my website
Yes.
to be looked at. And then there's the other person is somebody who suffered from, he's a white guy who suffered from thalidomide, which was like a sleep aid given to pregnant women in the late 50s, early 60s, that terribly deformed the infants. If they got it when they were pregnant, they got it when they were pregnant, and a lot of infants didn't make it to birth, and the deformations were catastrophic in some cases and minor in other, depends on when your mother took it. Anyway, he was in jail for something stupid, for sticking his hand in his pocket and pretending he had a gun. And the guards were beating him up. So his lawyer came to me and asked me to do a little film about him, which I did, and that's called Multiple Injuries.
Oh, wow.
And unfortunately, like, he had internal and external deformities, including his heart, and he died a couple of years ago at the age of like 56 or 57. He was my age. And so Mark Jasinski, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but he was a funny sweetheart, and he liked to call himself Twisted. He was a character, but man, did he have a hard row to hoe in life.
Yes. Oh gosh, wow. It's just can be very, very sorrowful and painful to see some of these stories, definitely. To go back to your publishing company, a lot of people I talk to, interview, are independent publishers, but you are, I guess it should be lucky enough to have a publisher. And I took a look at their website, and they seem like they have they do a good job of producing books that would be, quote, other. They do have a diverse list, it seems, of authors, and etc. Tell me a little bit about your publishing house.
Well, Akashic Books is the main publishing house, and Kaylee Jones Books is an imprint underneath that. And Akashic has a dynamic and interesting guy who leads it, Johnny Temple, and they say they want to degentrify literature.
Yes.
If you're familiar with Marlon James, who is got a number of big books, including Short History of Seven Killings, and more recently, I'm just trying to where is it? I have a list here. My mind is it's a terrible thing to waste. Jim Crow's Devil, which was his first book, and then then he jumped on to bigger publishers, and he's like really well known. He just did Black Leopard, Red Wolf. So he got his start there. And they were willing to do that because Kaylee Jones, who was met him at a book festival in Jamaica, saw that this book that he had been sending out that was rejected by publishing house after publishing house, that she said, "Oh no, this is good." So she gave it to Johnny. So they're willing to take risks like that. And I think for me, it was the perfect publishing house. It's not like I had 10 to choose from, but anyway, still, it was absolutely perfect to be published there because that's the kind of place that I want to be associated with. That, has that outlook.
Exactly. Wow. Well, that's wonderful that you've got that kind of support. Because a lot of times, artists, if you will, they don't always have that support, whether it's a record label or a publishing house. So that's really sounds very promising for people. Now, a lot of people may be questioning, well, this woman, she's written a novel, she's done documentaries, what's the base for her? So you have an educational base, of course, of how you started. At least you have a background in fine arts.
I was a theater major, which didn't teach me how to write at all.
Right. But in the atmosphere.
Yes, right. No, I mean, I went a long time being creative in different ways. But writing was one of those things that I knew from the time I was in junior high that I wanted to do, but I kind of got diverted for a number of reasons. That's how you can be a 60-year-old debut novelist.
Yes. That's okay.
No straight path to that achievement. So I just, I finally decided that writing was important enough for me to put aside doing other things and to just try. And I started by trying to write a memoir because I have a history of childhood sexual abuse and alcoholism, probably as a result. And so it just seemed to me that it was, I might be able to write about that. And I ended up using that idea to learn how to write, because writing is not just an art, but it's also a craft where you can get better if you listen to what people say.
Right.
You take criticism and you listen and you read a lot. So it was a self-education project that ended up introducing me to Kaylee Jones. And she was very supportive of my writing. And when I figured out that I didn't want to be working on the memoir anymore, I presented to her a number of possible novels. And she pointed to this one. She says, "Write that one. That's the one you should write." And so I had already been researching and stuff like that. So I just dived right in, and it went so much better than the memoir.
Wow.
So
wow, that's exciting. Now, what's next for you?
Oh my. Well, right over here, I have this book that I'm looking at. It's Colonial Kitchens.
Yes.
So anyway, I did not know. I did not know that in New York State that there were these British type manors over vast swaths of the state that were handed over to these families, the Rensselaers, the Livingstons, and all these others. And there were lords and ladies.
Oh.
And that was right up until the revolution. So I was like, really? That's really weird.
Exactly.
So I'm researching and writing a book set in 1777 during the American Revolution, and it's called The Loyalist's Wife. So it's about a woman who's married to somebody who is not a patriot, but is for the remaining with Britain and remaining in the British kingdom.
Okay.
And she's got to decide what to do. It's like,
wow. 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 Well, historical fiction is my jam. so I think I will be reading some of your books as we go further. I'm definitely reading The Third Mrs. Galloway, but I'll be waiting on that book as well.
Yeah, and the anniversary is coming up, the 250th anniversary. So I got to get going.
Oh, you do, you do, you do. Well, look, let me not hold you up any further. Tell everybody your social media handles and your website.
Sure. I'm on Facebook as Deirdre Sinnott, and there's only a couple of us, I think.
Right.
Common, right. Also, I'm Deirdre NYC on Twitter.
Okay.
And my website is thirdmrsgalway.com or deirdresinnott.com. It all goes to the same place.
Yes.
And there's a lot more information about the book and the videos of those documentaries, and it's a gold mine. And I just want to say that there's also an educator's guide. So there's so much history in this book that we decided to put together a free educator's guide, so that if people want to use it for class work, that they will be able to do that. And that was important for us to be able to do.
Wow, that's really important, especially, and there will be an upcoming show on this. We've got parents running around schools banning books and wanting books to be banned. So, so definitely we need this book in schools, definitely as teaching.
Yeah, not just in upstate New York. I mean, I never knew any of this history. I grew up there, and I don't want anybody else to have to not know the history, but for high school and up, I think it's well worth it. And
most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much, Deirdre, for joining me today. I really enjoyed it, and I am sure that a lot of people will be encouraged to read The Third Mrs. Galloway. Just in case you forgot any of your social media handles or any other information, it will be in the show notes below. It will be below also on YouTube. It'll be on my website, book-a-holic.com. And thank you again, Deirdre. I just appreciate authors like you who are believing in this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. It's been my pleasure.
Wow, we have been just so blessed in having all of these fabulous authors in 2021 on the Bookaholic Podcast. They have really added another dimension to literature. Many of them are independent, and some are fortunate enough, as Deirdre is, to have a publishing company that's behind her. But I am truly grateful for every interview that I'm doing. So, don't forget, I'll have below all of the Bookaholic Podcast social media handles and website and how you can get in touch with me. I love talking to people. I love listening to different perspectives, and I want to bring more of that in 2022. So thanks for joining today, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for joining the Bookaholic Podcast. We appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram at True Bookaholic. You can also email us at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. Don't forget to support your local library and independent bookstores.